One. Okay, so hi everybody that is going to be watching this later. I'm Mike, the usual person who is here to dissect the Bible and offend you in every possible way, because that's apparently what I do. But we are going to dissect the Word of God, and we are going to use the name Jesus, and we are going to use the name God, and we are going to use the name Yeshua. And so for those of you watching, just I wanted to get that out of the way now. We are going to go through the book of Enoch. We're going to have a very fruitful discussion. And if for anybody watching this after the fact, feel free if you do have any questions that you would like our study to maybe go over, or any prayer requests or any things like that, go ahead and leave those down in the comment section under this video. And I'll be sure to catalog them all, and we will address it on our next gathering when we come together to study Enoch. But we want to make sure that we include everybody that watches these videos. We love you all. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get prayed in and start dissecting the book of Enoch, starting on chapter 6. So, Keisha, if you want to go ahead.
Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for all that you do for us. We thank you for your love and for the blood that you shed so that we may gather together and that we may learn and grow in you and in knowledge in you, Father. We pray for you to bless this meeting and this fellowship and each and every person here, that your hand will be on them. They will open their eyes and their ears to the understanding and the gift from the Ruach HaKodesh to teach us your ways, so that we may please you and love you as you have loved us, Father. We thank you for your blessings, your miracles, and your tender mercies. We ask you, Father, to watch over everyone that needs you, your people, Lord. Bring understanding and wisdom, and bless this meeting and lead this meeting and guide us in your ways. In Jesus, Yeshua, Holy Spirit, Ruach HaKodesh, in your name, Father, we thank you. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So, oh, go ahead. Somebody was going to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question. I have the book of Enoch open, and it says book 1, chapter 6. Is that the one you're starting on?
Okay, so you're in that application that we
Yes, I am.
Okay, so yours I think is going to be, so chapter 6 is the last chapter that we did. So for you it would be chapter 5 in that application. That was the last chapter we did in yours.
Okay. So that's book
The
1,
chapter and
chapter
verse
5.
delineations are different depending on the person that did the translation. Oftentimes in some of these apocryphal books, those chapter and verse delineations are absolutely not inspired. 50% of the time they're in the wrong place. But let me go to, so
Chapter 6 here says that it's taken by angels. Is that the right one?
So go ahead and read verse 1 through 3 in your chapter 5.
Okay. Jeez, my phone's not working. Hang on 1 minute.
I put a link in the chat to a book of Enoch, but I'm not sure if it's the, right.
Okay, so it says books of the words of righteousness. The books of the words of righteousness and of the reprimand of the eternal watchers, in accordance with the command of the Holy Great One. In that vision, I saw in my sleep, what I will now say with tongue of flesh and with the breath of my mouth, which the Great One has given to men to converse therewith and understand with the heart. As he created and given to man the power of understanding the word of God, so hath he created me also and given me the power of reprimanding the watchers, the children of heaven.
I think you're on a different chapter than
that's not
last
where
week.
I'm at. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, so I'm on in the Sefer application, I'm on Enoch chapter 7 because we had already finished chapter 6. So in the
Okay.
Sefer application, it is chapter 7, and it starts off verse 1. I'll go ahead and read the first two verses, and then you guys can match them up. And then once we know we're all on the same page, then we'll go ahead and get somebody to read. So it happened after the sons had multiplied, or sons of men had multiplied in those days, that daughters were born to them, elegant and beautiful. And when the watchers, the sons of heaven, beheld them, they became enamored of them, saying to each other, "Come, let us select for ourselves women from the progeny of men, and let us beget children." Then their leader Shemyaza said to them, "I fear that you may perhaps be indisposed to the performance of this enterprise." So that's the first three verses of
That
where
is
I'm
not
at.
anything I have. I got to go find another book.
Yeah, that's chapter
Uh,
6.
That
For
was
me.
chapter 7.
Yeah, see, different chapter and verse delineations, but it's no big deal as long as we can all get on the same page. That's the most important part. If you go it, so Roseanne, if you go into the chat here on the Zoom, somebody put it in the chat and you can just click that one.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you, everybody.
So let's go ahead. If we all know right where we're at, who would like to do the reading? And we'll go. So this verse, this chapter is 15 verses long. Chapter number 7 of mine, which I think is chapter number 6 of yours, Trisha.
Mhm.
So for anybody who wants to read, who would like to volunteer?
I'll do it.
Okay, so Rhonda, you're going to be reading, and once we confirm that Roseanne is on the same page as us, then we'll go ahead and start reading.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm in the one you put in the chat. What chapter and verse are we at?
So you'll be in chapter 6.
And that's the one that says it came to pass with the children of men.
Yep.
All right, hallelujah, I made it.
Yay. Okay, Rhonda, if you can go ahead and read, and then I will go through it pretty much line by line after you read it.
Okay. It happened after the sons of men had multiplied in those days, that daughters were born to them, elegant and beautiful. And when the watchers, the sons of heaven, beheld them, they became enamored of them, saying to each other, "Come, let us select for ourselves women from the progeny of men, and let us beget children." Then their leader, Shemyaza, said to them, "I fear that you may be perhaps be indisposed to the performance of this enterprise, and that I alone shall suffer for the grievous crime." But they answered him and said, "We all swear and bind ourselves by mutual execration that we will not change our intention, but execute our projected undertaking." Then they swore all together, and all bound themselves by mutual execration. Their whole number was 200, who descended upon Ardis, which is the top of Mount Sherman. The mountain therefore was called Sherman, and because they had sworn upon it and bound themselves by mutual execration. These are the names of their chiefs. Oh boy, did I get the wrong chapter. Shemaiah, who was their leader, Erkabramo, Achabel, Tamael, Ramuel, Daniel, Azakel, Sarah. Oh, I'm going to skip those names. These were the prefects of those 200 angels, and the remainder were all with them. Then they took women, each choosing for themselves whom they began to approach, and with whom they cohabitated, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and the dividing of the roots. I'm wearing the wrong glasses. No wonder I can hardly see. That's better. And the women conceiving brought forth from Nephilim, and they bore to them 3 races. First the great Nephilim, and the Nephilim brought forth the Nephilim, and the Nephilim brought forth the Iliad, and they existed increasingly in power according to their greatness, whose stature was each 300 cubits. These devoured all the labor of the men until it became impossible to feed them, when they turned themselves against men in order to devour them, and began to injure birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish, to eat one another's flesh and to drink their blood. Then the earth reproved the unrighteous.
Okay, thank you, Rhonda. So before I go into a dissection, and the dissection of this chapter is going to be a bit long, because there's a lot of, surprisingly, upon reading it, you wouldn't think that there's a ton of genetic and physics information in here, but there is just, it's chock full. And so before I go ahead and go into my dissection, does anybody have a question? Okay, so I'm gonna go
I
ahead
have a
and
quick question.
oh, go for it.
So these were the fallen angels that got with women, and the women became pregnant, and they bore the Nephilim. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes,
And then
correct.
the Nephilim bore something else, is what she said.
The
And that
Elohim.
part, yeah, that wasn't in my this particular link or whatever. But so it says the giants couldn't then devoured mankind. So were they? Is that saying that they were like eating people, cannibals?
Yes, 100%. Yes, that is exactly what was occurring, and
Okay.
that's only one of the things that was occurring. Yeah, but you are 100% correct in your assumption there.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and hop on to going through this. So it happened after the sons of men had multiplied in those days, and that word multiplied is indicative of reproduction, right? So here we have in the very first verse, the sons of men had multiplied, meaning that they had children with women, and the absolute result of that is DNA. Okay, so you cannot reproduce without DNA. There has to be some sort of outside information that is input for DNA to even be a thing. So now here's where we're only in verse 1, and we've only made it to the word multiplied, and now we have such a multitude of bit of information in order to go through, so that there's a full understanding of what it's truly saying here. But so we have a genetic construct. Humans have a genetic construct, and in our genetic construct, from the beginning of time, right? So from the time of Adam and Eve, all of our genetic footprints were actually coded into the DNA of those two long before any of us ever existed. So at the spinning up of the universe, when God specifically had Adam and Eve in mind, he imprinted into their genetic code the eventual reproduction of genetic codes all the way down the line that would be you. So every detail about you is in a genetic code. It's ATCG coded, right? So the ATCG, or those are alphabet values for amino acids and amino acid bridges in your genetic construct. And what I'm actually going to go ahead and do here is I'm going to do a screen share and pull up something so that I can visually show you guys what I'm speaking about. And this, I believe, will be a big help for what I am going to go over. So let me get to the spot that I want to look at, and then I will go ahead and share. Okay, here we go. So now I'm going to screen share. So, and I'm going to look at my Photos, bang. Gallery. And where is it? Where is it? There it is. I'm just going to share my full screen. That'll be the easiest. Just share the screen. There we go. Start now. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my gallery. Now, can you guys see this on the screen?
Yes.
Everybody can see this. Okay. So your genetic makeup is made up of chromosomes. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on its side, actually, because it's probably going to help. Is that a better screen view now?
Yes.
Now that I have, okay. So your genetic makeup is made up of these chromosomes. The pink chromosomes represent the female, and the blue chromosomes make up the male. And these are just examples of the human chromosome. Now, what a chromosome truly looks like is something along this line. It is made up of a yarn of genetic material, and it kind of looks like this, as you can see here. So the twine that makes up each one of the chromosomes is made up of these little bridges that you see here in the center of your screen. That is the ATCG combo that makes up the entire zipper of your genetic code. Now, the chromosomes are located here, and they're just a jumbled mess of stuff inside of the nucleus of a cell. So, and inside that nucleus are a million times a million times a million times a million different genetic codes that are associated with the human body. So each one of these rungs is known as, or each half of a rung is known as a nucleotide. And then you have the rib of the helix, which is known as the DNA backbone. The double helix makes up, it accounts for the shape. And then when it is all coiled together, it is called a DNA molecule, which are again all contained inside of the nucleus. Now you can take your genetic code. Okay, so I am done screen sharing now. So now I can continue explaining. So you can take your genetic code, and each one of those rungs on that genetic ladder, each one of those nucleotides, as you just saw in that photo, is a sequence of letters. And the sequence of letters can then be written out as one long code. For an example, the code that builds the eardrum, the genetic code that builds the cells for the eardrum, is 750,000 letters long. So it is an extremely long genetic code. And so it's very complicated. And there are genetic codes associated with every single feature and function of the human body. And so those genetic codes, they zipper together in your genetic structure, and the genetic structure dictates what each code builds. And so you can actually write out a genetic code for a human being onto a piece of paper that would be miles long, but you could write it out. You could decode the human genome. And the incredible significance of this is that your children's genetic code is hidden inside of your own genetic code before you ever have children. And the same thing is true about you. You were hidden inside of the genetic code of your mother and father before you were ever born. And before they were ever born, your code was hidden in their great-grandfather and their great-great-grandfather and their great-great-great-great, going all the way back to the time of Noah, and then all the way through to the time of Adam and Eve. So at the beginning, when you were destined to exist just based on the genetic code inside of Adam and Eve, long before, centuries before, thousands of years before you ever existed. So at the beginning of time, you were in the mind of God as he wrote that genetic code for Adam. So And we know that time is a constraint of our universe, but it is not something that affects God. He is completely outside and separate from time. Time is a dimension that we encounter, but it is absolutely not a dimension that affects God whatsoever. So now knowing that, that means that at any time specifically, for us, we have to get to that point, but for God, he can interact with all of the different time, each individual second throughout all of the universe, all 10 to the 17th power seconds that have been in our entire universe for the length of time that physicists say that our universe has existed. He can interact with every single one of those seconds at the same time because he is outside of time. If you imagine time as a bookshelf, and each second is an individual book that you can pull off of that shelf. Well, for us, we have to get to that point in time in which that book is removed from the shelf. But for God, all of those books can be removed from the shelf individually, interacted, and put back on the shelf and move to the next second and do that over and over and over again, because time is not passing in eternity. Eternity is the absence of time. So for whereas we have to wait for something to interact, or we have to wait for us to get to those appointments that God has for us in our lives, those appointments to God are all happening simultaneously, all at the same time. Again, time is a construct. So when at the beginning of the universe, when everything was spun up and all of the genetic sequences were implanted into Adam and Eve for every human that would ever exist, you were in God's mind before you were ever formed in the womb, and before your mother's womb had ever even formed, and before your mother's womb had ever formed, you were on God's mind. And so what we see here in verse number 1 is it happened after the sons of men had multiplied, right? This is giving us an understanding. For Enoch, he's a very intelligent person, and he's trying to convey a very advanced topic, genetics, to a very limited populace who does not understand physics, science, or anything like that. So he's trying to convey these terms in layman's terms, so to speak. And what we get is the reason why, and I'll say this, the reason why the flat earth community even exists is because they take these terms that very intelligent people are trying to convey to a simple people that are around them, right? They have no science or technological understanding. So he's conveying principles along those same lines so that people will understand. And now we have a movement of people who are saying, oh no, that can only mean this, or that can only mean that, of what a primitive mind would look at it. And so they take these terms as meaning, oh, the earth was flat, or oh, this is just talking about people multiplying on the earth, when in actuality, when you dig into the depths of the scripture, you see that this is referencing multiplied in those days that daughters were born unto them. So it's not just talking about the birth, but it's talking about the process of the multiplication. And what is the process of humans multiplying but a genetic code sequence? So we have to take it, we have an understanding of genetics and coding and things like that, whereas they didn't. But Enoch obviously did, because he's trying to convey this to people that he knows for a fact will not fully understand him. And so you see in the book of Enoch that he says that this book is written for a distant generation. And the only generation that would fully understand that this is a reference to DNA is our generation. So this verse number 1 can also be a timestamp showing us here you are in the timeline. So, and when the watchers, the sons of heaven, beheld them, they became enamored of them, saying to each other, come, let us select for ourselves women from the progeny of men, and let us beget children. Okay, again, now you see in the first verse, you talk about the natural order of multiplication of humans. Now in verse number 2, you see the corrupted version. So you see a parallel between verse number 1 and number 2. And this shows the true Hebraic-esque writing that is here. So for many people that say that Hebrew is not the language that most other languages are based off of, you would have to say, I would have to say that they are wrong. And this heir to that. That's the beauty of the book of Enoch. So Enoch was translated into Slavonic. It's also in Hebrew and in Aramaic. And there is even a Greek translation of Enoch. But the original language that it was written in is a version of Hebrew that predates anything that we have evidence for post-flood. So it was originally written in a very well-documented ancient form of Hebrew. And the oldest fragment of Enoch that we have comes from 384 BC. This is before the Septuagint had even existed in 279 BC. So this is from the third or the 4th century BC, the original oldest fragment of Enoch that we have, and it's in a form of ancient Paleo-Picto-Hebrew, the very first block form of Paleo-Picto-Hebrew. So Enoch in itself can date itself by the Hebraic principles, right? So now when you look at any Hebrew scroll, you'll notice in the Psalms that there are compare and contrast Psalms. Whereas we look at music in a sense of phonetics, right? How something rhymes together. That's not how a Hebrew mind worked. And somebody that knew a Hebraic language, because the language itself works in a different way. It's based on similar constructs of ideas. So their music is built on similar constructs of ideas. Their poetry is built on one thing being said and then the next 3 statements exemplifying or lifting that or improving upon the first statement. So their music and their writings and their poetry were all written in a way much different than the English language. And what's funny is the English language is heavily Latin and Greek influenced, not Hebraically influenced. And so most of the languages in the world that are not based upon a Hebrew language do the same thing. They use rhyme when they make music and poetry, and that's how they get their important points across, is the similarity of sound between words. But we know that compare and contrast is a Hebraic idea based on the construct of the language. And so for anyone to say that that Hebrew is not the base language for all other languages, Enoch is pre-flood. There are people out there that say Enoch spoke Akkadian. But why do we see here in verse number 1 and verse number 2 evidence of a Hebraic understanding mind and not evidence of an Akkadian thinking mind? Somebody that spoke Akkadian is again a language that in their music and poetry use phonemes or phonetics, sound, rhymes, things like that to make their music and poetry sound better. Whereas Hebrew does not do that, and they go on principle of idea and building upon or compare and contrast. And so again, Enoch being pre-flood and having still Hebraic principles and ideas in what he's trying to get across here, in my opinion, is more proof that Hebrew is the base language for all other languages. Now, stepping from that side note, we see here this compare and contrast. We see here this compare and contrast in the book of, oh, hold on one second. Sorry, I'll continue now. But we see the compare and contrast here in verse number 1 and verse number 2, and that it's comparing the natural order of multiplying, natural men and women multiplying, a man and a man and a woman and a woman. That's absolutely unnatural. So we see God as not referencing something unnatural, but 100% referencing something natural. Now, genetic alterations also are completely unnatural. And we see that the Watchers, which would have a, if there is DNA in fallen angels, then their DNA would be different. It wouldn't be human because they are not human. Okay, these are beings that can materialize and make themselves seem as one thing, or change shape, or change the way that they portray themselves, or be huge and powerful, or be small, and they can do all kinds of things that are not in the genetics of man to be able to do. And so we see here that these non-humans are going to try to multiply and beget children with women. So we see gene editing occurring here in Enoch verse 7, or chapter 7, verse 2. So then their leader says, I fear that you may perhaps be indisposed to the performance of this enterprise. That is a terrible, terrible translation. He's basically saying, I fear you make me deal with all of this punishment. Now, it's interesting. There are some people that do believe, and I'll give you both perspectives, but there's some people that believe Azazel is the original angel that did the thing in the garden, and that is who is referenced by when it mentions Satan or Lucifer in the garden. Or then there's other points of view that the person that fell, the person that did the original sin in the garden, or not the person, but the fallen angel that did the original sin in the garden, was actually Shemiaza, because Shemiaza is the leader of all of these fallen angels that fall with him. Now, I lean more towards the Shemiaza purpose, that Shemiaza being the leader, and his name also directly meaning the bearer of light. That is, for me, that is a connection to Shemiaza, the leader of these fallen angels, being the one that did the act in the garden. And so if this is true, and if we take my assumption saying that this is true, then he's saying, look, I've already been dealing with the punishment for these crimes, and you want to come down and do the same thing that I did, but you must swear to me, we must take an oath here upon this mountain that you will also bear the punishment that I currently will have to bear. So he convinces them all. How? Okay, we live in a world right now of stupid. Does anybody disagree with that? Do we not live in a world of people putting shoes on their face to go in stores? Of people putting plastic bags on their hands to go to the grocery store? Like, we live in a world of really, really stupid. How much stupider did these angels have to be like, oh, look, he's going to burn in eternal torment. Look, I want to do that too. How? They knew God. These angels were close with. They had a connection to God, like Michael and Gabriel and all of the other angels, closer than we currently have here on earth. They knew things and could do things and were immortal, absolutely immortal, could not die. They were spirit beings. They didn't even have to deal with flesh. How stupid is this group of people? This group of fallen angels that are just that decide, oh, I want to go and fornicate, and that's more important than existing as the creation that God created. That's just, I think that that's really, really dumb, in my personal opinion.
It makes you think that they could have like mental illness, or if that's possible.
Mentally retarded angels. I like the sound of that.
Yeah,
Mentally
something like that.
retarded angels. I do like the sound of that.
Mhm.
So Now, Shemyaza, I believe, I lean more towards the view that Shemyaza is the original and that these others were subordinates and that they decided to fall with him. Remember, it says they, and with his tail cast down a third of the angels or a third of the stars in heaven. So that's from Revelation. The dragon cast down a third of the angels from heaven. So and that could be a reference here to these specific angels that it mentions here, and it talks about these 200 that are a bunch of leaders. We don't know if that's the full amount or if there's more than that that aren't named. We just can infer. But now Shemyaza says, and that I alone shall suffer for this such a grievous crime. But they answered him and said, we all swear. They swore a curse. Think about it. This instance right here is the first curse. This is the first one. Enoch is giving you a glimpse, kind of like Job, right? So think about Job. In Job, Satan comes before God and says, and accuses Job in front of God. Somehow he has access in some way or another to be able to accuse the brethren in the presence of God at that point. So Job gives you a view into what's going on in a dimension that we cannot see and we probably can't even fully perceive. Well, Enoch is giving you a glimpse into that same information with technological and temporal references to know what time period that we currently sit in. And so Enoch is doing the same type of thing, giving you a really extreme view. Now, I went over in the last biblical study that I believed that Enoch was the builder of the Pyramid of Giza, and I'm not going to go super deep into the Pyramid of Giza in this study because I went pretty thoroughly through it last time. But some people believe that Job was a king over Salem at one point or another. Now, kings are usually from a bloodline, and their kingship is handed from bloodline to bloodline, especially kings of God, whether they're considered, whether they are a king, whether they are a ruler, whether they're of one of the tribes, right? So the scepter shall not leave Judah. So the tribe of Judah is the ruling class tribe. But there are other tribes that have ruled, but that lineage is specifically designed to be the ruler of God. Now, Enoch, this is all before the 12 tribes, so there would be no tribal reference for Enoch or Job. But if Enoch built the Pyramid of Giza and was the original ruler, then it would be safe to assume that one of his descendants would then take over rulership of this place known as Salem. Well, we have evidence that Shem, the son of Noah, there is evidence supporting this, but Shem, the son of Noah, actually was a king of Salem. Shem is direct post-flood. And then somebody from, oh, I got a pretty bad echo in here. Somebody was echoing. Okay. So now it's probably a good assumption, and I know assumptions make an ass out of you and me, but it's probably a pretty safe assumption that that rulership of Salem going down the line through Shem, from Enoch, through Noah to Shem, from Shem to Job. Okay, so remember, Shem lived a very long time after the flood. Actually, Shem lived so long that in fact his and Abraham's lives overlapped for the entirety of Abraham's life. And in fact, that Shem lived longer than Abraham did. So by some biblical accounts, there are people that believe that directly after the flood, that when Shem became of an age in which rulership was no longer plausible for him, that he handed rulership down to one of his descendants. And we know that Peleg, which the earth was divided in his day, we can trace his lineage back through Shem. And we know that Job, or Jobab, a son of Peleg, a great grandson of Peleg, also can trace his line through Shem. So genealogically, we can connect all of those names down to Jobab. And seeing as Enoch, if Jobab is a descendant of Enoch, and we see in the book of Job a glimpse at a dimensional aspect that we can't fully understand, of Satan being in the presence of God, accusing the brethren, accusing Jobab, and all of those things that happened along the lines of Job, we can see him giving us a glimpse. Then we can also see the connection between Job and here in the book of Enoch, and this similar glimpse that we're getting into a spiritual interaction, just like in the book of Job. And so in my opinion, the connection of that similarity in style and construction of the book of Job and the book of Enoch is evidence that there is some sort of genetic link between Enoch and Job. Now, this again is tribal distinction, but I do believe that that shows the royal line as it went down, which eventually led to Abraham, because we know Abraham, he came from Terah. Terah was an archbishop or something like that, a pagan archbishop in Babylon for Nimrod, and that Abraham is a son of Terah, and we can actually trace Terah right on through back to Shem. So we see a connection between all of them. And Abraham, when he gave tithes to this Melchizedek, or the king of Salem at that time, he was actually giving tithes to somebody of his own genetic makeup, of the same ancestral connection. So that is an interesting fact in itself, and I like to bring the history, the biblical history, into view as well. But we see this glimpse into a dimensional aspect that we don't understand of what's going on. So, and they bound themselves. The very first curse happens here, and they bind themselves by mutual curses, and they will not change their intentions nor change their ways, but take under or finish this undertaking. And then they all swore together and all bound themselves by mutual curses. Their whole number was 200, who descended upon Ardis, which is the top of Mount Hermon. So Mount Hermon, and Hermon means essentially to be accursed. So when you see Mount Hermon, that's what it's referencing. And Ardis is actually a mountain range. So this is Ardis is an ancient word that's actually mistranslated. It's arduous, but Ardis is a short form of that same word. And Ardis is, we believe, based on some of the studies from Ron Wyatt, we believe that Ardis is in the same area in which Sodom and Gomorrah was. And it was a mountain in that area. And it was an accursed mountain range in that specific area. And we see, so we see that this curse occurs. And then further down the line, you continue further down the line, and you get to when Abraham has to pray. He negotiates with God for the saving of Sodom and Gomorrah if there be 10 righteous. And he such an awesome picture when you see this Jewish guy negotiating with God, like, oh, come on, 45, 40, what about 30, what about 20? And you can almost see the humor in it, almost like God is like, come on, yeah, all right, come on, all right. It would probably be an awesome and hilarious sight to see. But in this instance, then you see Lot is saved from Sodom and Gomorrah by some angels, but this mountain range Ardis is believed by some scholars, and I'm just going to give you all points of view, by some scholars believed to be in that area of Sodom and Gomorrah. And if that connection is actually true in Mount Hermon, it was the mountain range in which Lot and them fled over when his wife turned around and saw the city burning and was turned to a pillar of salt, that's that same area, then the punishment that's dictated in Deuteronomy for those that bind with curses, which is for someone to be stoned to death, actually occurred at that place where the first cursed was bound long before the law was ever given. So very interesting delineation and connection between these. But so they swore, bound themselves with curses. Then that mountain, therefore, was called Hermon, because they had sworn upon it and bound themselves by mutual curses. And these are their names: Shimyaza, Urak. Yeah, I'm gonna botch them too. Wow. Okay, I thought I was gonna be able to just pronounce those, but dang, that's a mouthful. I'm gonna go ahead and go with Rhonda here. We're just gonna skip these names. These were the prefects of the 200 angels, and the remainder were all with them. So these are the prefects of the 200 angels. All of this list, the leaders of those 200, but there's also a remainder that's with them. Then they took women. Notice that this word here is took. So this gives emphasis that these women may have not been willing in this participation. This is possibly indicative of some ancient or very first form of satanic sexual ritual. This could be one of the very first occurrences of this type of disgusting, vile act that you see secret societies today taking part in, like the movie Eyes Wide Shut, or what goes on at certain islands and things like that. You see here, this could be the very first form of that. Now, I'm just giving you all of the points of view. I want you to dig for yourself and figure out where you stand on these topics, but I would like to lay out the full topic for you guys to see. And they began to approach. So they took women, choosing for himself the women that they would, and this word here that's translated as approach probably wouldn't be the best word to use for whom they took hold of, would be a better way to say it. And with whom they cohabitated. Again, this is polite terms. In the first part of this verse, you see took. Teaching them sorcery. What is the Greek word for sorcery? Can anybody tell me? Anybody in this?
Pharmakia.
Pharmakia. So, teaching them sorcery. Translate that to Greek. Teaching them pharmakia. So if this verse 10 is the first instance of a satanic sexual ritual, then in this satanic sexual ritual, if this is the first occurrence of this ever happening, the thing that secret societies do now, then pharmakia was involved in that very first satanic ritual, if this is the first. If this is even a satanic ritual. In my opinion, based on this construction of these words here, it kind of seems forced upon and very satanic-esque. And I mean, you see that these are the fallen angels, so it wouldn't be surprising to think that this is the first form of that ritual that then proceeded, that we now see in secret societies around the world. Teaching them sorcery, incantations. Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary. That's an incantation, just so that we all are clear. And the dividing of roots and trees. Okay, so making poisons and things like that, because most poisons come from the nuts of trees or the roots of plants. Pretty much most poisons on this planet the majority of them, about 63 or 64% of most poisons comes from some product of a plant or from root of a plant. So the fruit or the root of a plant. And it's interesting because the Bible is very specific on what the root is, the root of Jesse, Yeshua, right? So the root. And then what is the product or the fruit that we bear? Well, the fruit that we bear is evidence of the Holy Spirit. our fruit gives evidence whether the Spirit resides in us. And so you see pharmakia, the Hail Marys, and poisons and things like that. These are all forms of a corruption of the original things that God designed for man. Because believe it or not, this entire universe was designed for us by God because he loves us that much. Now, and then the women conceiving brought forth Nephilim, and they bore to them 3 races first, the great Nephilim, the Nephilim, which is the same word, and then the Nephilim, which is the same. I don't know why it repeats the same word 3 times in the Sefer. So there's 3 different classifications. We know that the speed of light in the beginning of the universe, in the beginning of time, during the time of Adam and Eve, the speed of light was moving roughly 3 million times faster than it currently is. The current speed of light, as of a few years ago, was 299,849,792, and that's in meters per second. In kilometers, roughly 300,000 kilometers per second. But the speed of light was much increased in that day, in the time that Enoch here is speaking. And at that time, because the speed of light is moving so much faster, because the speed of light is moving so much faster, you actually can, animals and people and things like that can grow much, much larger. Nerve endings and nerve receptors and synapses can fire, and for the current speed of light, an animal that is 200 foot long, let's use a blue whale as an example, they're on average 200 feet long. A blue whale, when it thinks, it takes over a second for that thought to get from its brain all the way down to its tail, because of the distance that it has to travel through the nerve receptors and neurons in its body. Much longer than that, and you're starting to get into the 2 and 3 seconds for a thought to happen and then its tail to move. If you start getting even longer than that, like the length of some of the animals that we have evidence for that lived pre-flood, we're talking 500-600 meter long animals. It would take a matter of like 8 or 9 seconds for a thought from their brain to get to their tail at our current speed of light. We know animals that size existed, so that means that the only way they could exist was higher pressures, but a higher speed of light. And so that effect, the causality of the effects that we see, is that animals and people and things had to get smaller in order to still functionally send thoughts from their brain to the tips of their fingers and to their feet to walk. Motor functions would not be possible. So we know that the increased speed of light made for huge stature people. We see that they're 300 cubits tall, so their stature each was 300 cubits, and these devoured all the labor of men until it became impossible to feed them. And then they turned themselves against men in order to devour them. But the Nephilim were created by this genetic altering of man's seed and the fallen angel's seed, whatever that is. We see in Genesis when the serpent is cursed to lay on its belly, and you shall bruise her forehead and she shall bruise your heel, right? So it's talking about the enmity between the seed of man and the seed of the fallen, this genetic alteration that was happening. During the time of Enoch, genetic alterations were occurring, although in a more natural environment than they are now, where we're using technology to do it. Back then, they were just using a form of ancient interspecies, so to speak, fornication, or interdimensional species fornication. So the product of that, again, it's this form of gene editing. That's all the fallen angels were doing, is they were gene editing and creating these half DNA of man, half altered DNA. And these creatures were coming out as normal sized babies and then growing to huge, huge sizes, 300 foot tall. and then eating people. They were essentially cannibals. So and they were violent, rage filled. They had. So think about this, right? So you and I, we have a soul, we have an eternal destiny, we have a place that we're going to go no matter what, whether it be heaven or hell. We would like to say that we're for sure going to go to heaven, but until we get there, we're always on the weary, like, what can I change in my life to get away from the sin? I really definitely want to just be there to dwell with Yeshua. But again, until we get to that specific tipping point, for us, we can say for a fact, oh, I know I'm going to heaven, but it's really truly a mystery until we die. We don't know for a fact the direction in which we are going to head. And so that's the truth of the matter. But think about it. If you didn't have a soul, but you still existed and had a brain, no matter what, you were going to go to hell because you don't have a soul. Your body is going to be destroyed, and whatever evil, whatever existence you are, there's no way you can get into heaven because you weren't created by God. You were not a creation of God, and becoming an altered creation of God, again, is the same thing. You lose that connection to God. So these were creations. These were asa, right? So the Hebrew word asa means to make from something that's already been made. God creates, but man and angel and fallen angels, they make. We can't create anything out of nothing. Creation means from nothing. But they made the Nephilim. So these are handmade. It's like a robot. Do you think you build a robot that thinks and acts for itself and it somehow has a soul? Absolutely does not just have a soul. That's not how it works. But so these creations, these things that were made, not created, were evil. There was no other destiny but for them to live and be dead. There's no other destiny for them. So they literally there's only one repercussion for anything that they do. And so violence and evil is only natural for these alterations. And so, yes, again, this genetic altering changes the way, I mean, we see it today. These genetic alterations are changing people, and people are literally changing. They're becoming evil. People are doing and saying disgusting and evil things after they've been genetically altered. So we see kind of the byproduct of that now. So then they turned themselves against men in order to devour them, and began to injure birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish, to eat one another's flesh and to drink their blood. Drink their blood. And where is life? Life is in the blood. And then the earth reproved the unrighteous. Notice that it says here for this end generation, right, that the earth reproved. So he's speaking, he's giving us history to the end times generation. But he's also speaking directly to them. He's giving us, those that live in this time, a view of the glimpse of the history of what was happening pre-flood. And then here's the statement: after all of these things happen, then the earth reproved the unrighteous, right? So the earth brought up water and flooded them out. But in our day, we are also waiting for the earth to reprove the unrighteous. So again, we're getting pretty close to that, but I do believe that what we're seeing in Enoch is that Enoch is going through, yes, the history, but it's also kind of laying out what's going on right now. And so, yeah, that is my very long-winded breakdown of one chapter of Enoch. So I do apologize for going so long.
I think it's interesting that they only took one woman, though, since they're kind of perverted. I would have thought they would have had more. Do you see where I'm talking about?
I do see what you're talking about.
Each chose for himself one, and then they began to teach that one all those charms and enchantments.
Yeah, I do see what you're talking about. Sorry, I was helping my wife pull the groceries out of the van. She just got back from the store. But it is interesting that they only took one. It is definitely interesting that they only took one.
Because they created, there were a lot of Nephilim, weren't there? Didn't they have, had a lot of them back then?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure because we have
Yeah.
a lot of evidence to support that there have been a lot of giant like skeletons and stuff like that found in archaeological digs. So yeah, there's evidence there was a lot of them.
So I was thinking, like, if they would have had multiple wives, they could have reproduced many, many Nephilim. But if they only had one, which it sounds like they took one, that one would have, wouldn't have had so many. But
Well, I mean, there were enough of them at least that were shedding enough blood on the earth that God flooded the entire planet. So there was enough of them to piss God off. That's for sure.
right.
Okay, does anybody else have questions and before we start reading the next chapter? Okay. Does anybody want to read the next chapter?
I can.
Nobody?
I can
Okay,
read.
so we're on chapter, in yours, is it chapter 7 or chapter 8?
7.
Okay.
I believe it's 7.
Yeah, go ahead and read, and
Well,
so how many, this was only 9 verses, so go ahead and read 7 and I'm assuming 8 for you, right?
yeah, this is chapter 8. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, this is chapter 8?
Yeah, chapter 8 for me, and it has 2 long verses, and that's it.
And then what's the beginning of chapter 8 for yours?
And Aziel taught men to make swords and knives and shields.
Yeah, okay. That's chapter 8. And then chapter 9 says, then Michael and Gabriel, Raphael, Suriel, and
Right.
Uriel. Yeah, so if you want to read both of those.
Okay. All right. And Aziel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways. Simiaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Armoros, the resolving of enchantments. Barakijel taught astrology. Kokabel, the constellations. Ezekiel, the knowledge of the clouds. Rachiel, the signs of the earth. Shamsiel, the signs of the sun. And Sariel, the course of the moon. And as men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven. And then Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. And they said one to another, the earth made without inhabitant cries the voice of their cryings up to the gates of heaven. And now to you, the holy ones of heaven, the souls of men make their suit, saying, bring our cause before the Most High. And they said to the Lord of the ages, Lord of lords, God of gods, King of kings, and God of the ages, the throne of thy glory standeth unto all the generations of the ages, and thy name holy and glorious and blessed unto all. Unto all, seest all things, and nothing can hide itself from thee. Thou seest what Aziel has done, who hath taught all unrighteousness on earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn. And Semi-Azza, to whom thou hast given authority to bear rule over his associates, and they have gone to the daughters of men upon the earth, and have slept with the women, and have defiled themselves, and revealed to them all kinds of sins. And the women have borne giants, and the whole earth has thereby been filled with blood and unrighteousness. And now, behold, the souls of those who have died are crying, and making their suit to the gates of heaven, and their lamentations have ascended, and cannot cease because of the lawless deeds which are wrought on the earth. And thou knowest all things before they come to pass, and thou seest these things, and thou dost suffer them, and thou dost not say to us what we are to do to them in regard to these. So, who is talking to, is somebody talking to God here? Or is it just Enoch just saying what's happening?
Yeah, I think Enoch is pretty much just giving a comment of the things that God is showing him.
Okay.
And yeah, I think he's really just giving like a commentary of all of the things that are going on that he's watching happening. Because remember, in the beginning it says there was a righteous man who was shown a vision in the heavens, and then it was also shown to Enoch, and he understood everything that he saw. So which again gives air that Enoch had some understanding of physics and math and dimensionality, which is pretty good for a time when those things weren't even things. So, but yeah, I think Enoch is just giving a commentary. Does anybody have any questions? If nobody's got any questions, then I'll just do the breakdown of this. And I'll try to make sure that this breakdown isn't an hour and a half for one verse. Very difficult for me to do, by the way, just so you know. It's hard for me to not just break it all down. But okay, so Enoch 8, I'm gonna go. So Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, fabrication of mirrors, the workmanship of bracelets and ornaments, the use of paint, the beautifying of the eyebrows, stones of every valuable and select kind, and all sorts of dyes, so that the world became altered, so that the world became vain. So thinking about weapons and things that they can do to take others or make themselves look better than this person or make themselves feel better than this person, or these are all definitely probably not the greatest of things. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not saying that bracelets and makeup and all that stuff is evil. This is just saying where that came from. Adam and Eve and probably their children probably didn't put makeup on. Probably wasn't a thing then. And they didn't use swords and fight people and all that type of stuff. So, yeah, this was definitely a contrivance. But impiety increased, fornication multiplied. Okay, so fornication, this is that product. This is a genetic product, right? So multiplied, and they transgressed and corrupted all their ways. So they continued fornication, and it multiplied. So this is probably where they started just going from woman to woman and doing what they will to them, and then them having babies that create more and more of these Nephilim type creatures. Amazarach taught all the sorcerers and dividers of roots. So Amazarach taught men to be sorcerers, to be pharmakists, essentially. Dividers of roots, well, it's mostly plants and things like that, in which we get the chemicals for a lot of the pharmakia. Armor's the solution of sorcery, right? So like poisons and things like that, and then also the cures and that type of stuff. Barakiel, the observers of the stars, right? So this is like trying to use the stars to predict the future. That would be like divination. So obviously this angel that's mentioned here is the one that started that process that eventually became horoscope worship that we see in today's day and age. But then we have signs. Then Tamiel taught astronomy. A lot of translations put it as astrology, and a lot of translations put it as astronomy. I don't believe that this translation in mine that says astronomy is correct, because astronomy was taught to Adam and Eve. Astronomy was taught by God to obviously Enoch saw a vision in the stars. So this is a form of astronomy, is the study of the stars, not an evil thing. So I believe that this is probably astrology, which is a corruption of astronomy. I believe that would probably be a better translation. And Azrael taught the motion of the moon, and men being destroyed cried out, and their voice reached to heaven. And then Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Suriel, and Uriel looked down from heaven and saw the quantity of blood which was shed on the earth, and all the iniquity which was done upon it, had said one to another the voice of their cries. The earth deprived has cried even to the gate of heaven. And now to you, O you Holy One of heaven, the souls of men complain. Okay, so who's the Holy One of heaven? If you think about this, right? A lot of people will take the Holy One of heaven as being just Yod He Vav He. But I personally believe this to mean the Holy Echad. So a lot of people will try to say, oh, this is obviously just talking about Yod He Vav He. It's not referencing the Spirit. It's not referencing Yeshua. But this word in Hebrew is Echad. So, O you Holy Echad of heaven, the souls of men complain, saying, bring judgment to us from Elyon. Then they say to their Lord, the King, Adonai Eloha Ha Elohim, Melech Ha Melechim. The throne of your glory is forever and ever and forever. and ever is your name sanctified and glorified. You are blessed and glorified. You have made all things. You possess power over all things. And all things are open and manifest before you. You behold all things, and nothing can be concealed from you. Now it starts to kind of tie into Azazel, right? And so you've seen what Azazel has done, how he's taught every species of iniquity upon the earth. I don't think that that is a mistake, where it says here he has taught every species of iniquity upon the earth. What would be a species of iniquity if you think about it yourself, right? Knowing that genetic alterations are evil to God. What would be a species of iniquity? If somebody changed their genetic makeup and removed the fingerprint of God, it would legitimately match the definition of a species of iniquity. So, and we know that Azazel taught, or we know that Shemyaza taught what? Shemyaza taught sorceries, and Azazel taught swords, knives, and cutting implements. So the implement that eventually became a palisade, which is a long, slender, pointed stick that they put in front of forts to prevent enemies from running up at the base of forts and things like that. They're a defensive thing. Well, later that palisade became a blow dart, which you have the Hebrew word toxon, for the white horse that comes with a toxon, or the Greek word toxon, which means a blow dart, a dart, a poison dart. Well, later that same palisade morphs into from a stick, a wooden stick, all the way down through to essentially a hypodermic needle. So without Azazel teaching the metallurgy and things like that, to get to the point where a weapon could go all the way down to become a needle instead of being a giant sword or a huge pointy stick. And then Shemyaza taught the sorcery, or the pharmakia, or the mixing of roots and plants and chemicals. Without those two concoctions, the charagma, or the mark of the beast, could not exist. So those two things are required. You've seen what Azazel done, taught every species of iniquity. So you see how Azazel and Shemyaza are equally responsible for the created species of iniquity that's currently upon the earth. And it's disclosed to the world in all secret things which are done in the heavens. Shemyaza also has taught sorcery, pharmakia, to whom you have given authority over those who are associated with him. They have gone together to the daughters of men, have lain with them, and have become polluted, defiled, right? Defiled. So this is giving air to the first form of genetic alteration, and it's explaining to you the same mode of delivery for this genetic alteration, essentially the same mode, a weapon, a palisade, used to deliver a pharmakia or sorcery, which is genetic alteration. And then you see again that today this is all happening. They have gone together with the daughters of men, laid with them, and become polluted or defiled with the abomination of desolation, and have revealed their sins to them. And women likewise have brought forth Nephilim, false creations, Asa made creations. Thus the whole earth has been filled with blood and with iniquity. Everybody that takes if you take the mark, you are dead. That's just the truth. Like, whether you die now or not doesn't matter, because you are dead permanently if you take the mark. There's no coming back from that. You cannot be like, oh, my bad, my mistake, I changed my mind. No, it doesn't work that way. But we know that once you take it, you're essentially if you take the mark of the beast, you are dead. Whether you die now or not doesn't matter. Remember, Adam was told that if you eat the plant of this tree, if you eat the fruit of this tree, you shall surely die. And then the snake goes, oh, but did he really say that? Did he really mean that you're really going to die? And then Eve takes a bite of it, and she doesn't die instantly. Same sense here. Once you take that bite, once you take that mark, you don't die right that second, but you are dead. And not only do you get the first death, but you also get the second. So thus has the whole earth been filled with the blood and with iniquity. And now behold, the souls of those who are dead cry out and complain even to the gate of heaven. Their groaning ascends, nor can they escape from the unrighteousness which is committed on the earth. You know all things before they exist. You know these things and what has been done by them, yet you do not speak to us. So think about this. Righteous man Enoch is like telling God, like, he's talking to God. He's having like a conversation with God in this moment, I believe. And he's like, all this bad stuff is going on right now. Where are you? You're so quiet. And Enoch is like, is sharing those same emotions. Like, what? Like, I know we've all felt that. Like, something bad happens and sometimes our first reaction, and sometimes not, but sometimes our first reaction is to be like, why, God? Why? When something bad happens. And you see Enoch is so human, and this is evidence of his humanity, because he does the same thing right here. All these things are happening, and what are you even doing? Where are you at, God? That's basically what he's saying here. What on account of these things ought we to do to them? So now Enoch is taking commentary through this. He is writing out his commentary, and I'm sure these are actual thoughts that he was thinking. Like, man, and where is God in all this? But yeah, so that was a lot quicker of a breakdown for Enoch 8 and 9, but that's basically what I have for these chapters. Anybody have any questions after that? No questions? All right. Well, let's do one more chapter, and then or I mean, do you guys, I mean, we've been on here for 2.5 hours. Are you guys tired? Do you guys want to call it good and then reconvene for the next one? Anybody
Yeah,
got an opinion?
I'm gonna probably go, but are we on tomorrow night?
I'm not, I don't know.
Okay.
We would have to, I haven't gotten anything from anybody, so I don't know.
Okay.
Um,
That was good
yeah,
tonight, though.
well, awesome. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And somebody want to pray out here before we go?
I will. Thank you, Father God, for bringing us together to learn the word, to learn the meanings. Thank you for giving Michael the knowledge and the discernment to give us the word so that we can break it down and understand it. God, I ask you to come into each of our lives, give us peace and comfort during times that people are suffering. Help our families, Lord, and our children to stay strong in these times. Give us all peace and comfort in what we do every day. Keep us safe, and we love you for loving us, your most wonderful Heavenly Father. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Heck yeah, y'all. Well, I'm gonna stop the recording right now. Thank you guys all for coming, and thank you guys for watching. I hope this was a blessing. And maybe next time, if you're watching afterwards, maybe you could just join us. Shoot a message, and we'll get in here. Praise Yeshua.
Good night, all.
Oh.
God bless.
Good night, guys.